Hello, and welcome back to Red Alert Alternative Director's Cut with me, Dr. J. This episode might be quote unquote interesting because I have my cat sitting on my keyboard tray making a nuisance of herself. So we'll see how that pans out and if it causes any disasters. Today we are going to play through Allies 14, Zhukov's Counterattack. The reason that we're replaying this mission is because Artega, when he played it, um, he thought that the second half of the mission, after you're done defending and you attack Zhukov's forces, was too easy. And on reflection, I agreed with him. So the first part of the mission, the defense part, has not changed, but the second part, the counterattack portion, has indeed had some changes made to it. So this is the opening part of the mission where Zhukov destroys this base, which is not player controllable because it belongs to good guy instead of Greece. And this was originally more elaborate. Instead of just a nuke getting dropped and then some mammoth tanks rolling up and easily wiping out what remained, was originally a more complicated cutscene, but I couldn't reliably make the AI do the correct thing every time. Because, as we discussed in a previous episode, the AI is semi autonomous and isn't fully predictable even when you tell it how to behave. So, I couldn't reliably force it to even deploy its MCV properly with the way it would just kind of do its own thing. So, I simplified it and I just had the changed it so that the enemy forces nuke down that base, then the mammoths roll in, do a little mop up, and that's pretty much all there is to it. Now there is a bridge down here that you can destroy, which will reroute the enemy attacks on your western position and force them to go through the center. I'm not sure if that's actually the best thing to do, however. I don't know if there's actually that much benefit to funneling all of the enemy attacks to this area. Having them spread out in some ways makes them easier to defend against, even though your own defense also has to be more spread out. Didn't mean to immediately put that on hold. So harvesters have this annoyingly programmed behavior where they like to harvest fields from the northwest to the southeast corner, which when you're harvesting them from the south or the east actually means that their harvesting behavior is quite suboptimal and it will take them longer to get you your funds. I didn't really realize that until after I'd finished the mod. Or maybe I would have designed missions with that behavior in mind, although probably not, because honestly that would be kind of annoying, having to try to compensate for that harvesting behavior. Like, what exactly would I do? Make sure that the player base is always north or west of the ore field? That seems a little silly, but it is something to know about how they're programmed. It's not 100% reliable. Like, they don't always just start from the exact northwest and go down to the exact southeast, but it's sort of a general tendency that they appear to have. Okay. So you just want to make sure that you get the attention of the enemy forces here so that they don't just go straight to the northwest part of the map and cause you to fail the mission. And as long as you can distract them, generally the advanced guard towers will be able to handle them. So, advanced guard towers, I've always thought that they're really cool. I love their sleek, angular design, and just the fact that they're these super guard towers that fire rockets. Even though I don't know where the rockets come from, I don't see anything on this structure that really looks like a missile or rocket launcher. But still, I just think the concept is pretty cool. However, in Tiberian Dawn, advanced guard towers are really underwhelming because their rockets are not good against heavy armor, heavy vehicles. I mean, they're not completely awful, but they're not that effective. So their missiles are really good against infantry. But that's a little pointless because regular guard tower. Okay, you can see how they really want to harvest from the west here, like I was telling you about. I'm going to forcibly make them harvest closer to my refinery so that I get my money faster. But the fact that advanced guard towers are really good against infantry isn't that helpful because regular guard towers are really good against infantry. I guess one minor saving grace of the advanced guard tower in Tiberian Dawn is they're also GDI's only structural anti-air defense, which strikes me as kind of dumb because they're $1,000 a pop. 1,000 credits seems expensive for your only anti-air structure. But they're kind of the all-purpose advanced base defense. So because I think that they're really cool and wished that they were better, that they had effectiveness to match their coolness, I beefed them up for this mod. So their missiles are much more destructive. They're actually decent against heavy vehicles. They have very long range. And they're still good against infantry. However, they no longer target air units, which isn't even necessary because I gave both sides SAM sites for this mod. There's a few generic type of units that I gave to both sides, or buildings, SAM sites and guard towers being examples of that. Because I feel like those are just general utility structures that make sense for both sides to be able to build them. Both sides get Humvees. I would have liked to give the Allies / Nod the buggy instead of the Humvee, just because that feels that much more like a... What are you doing? Oh, okay. You're just being weird. That would feel that much more like a ragtag paramilitary force if they had buggies instead of Humvees. But I only had so many vehicles to work with because when you're modding Red Alert, you can't add new units or vehicles. You have to replace existing ones. And since buggies and Humvees fill the exact same role and are extremely similar units, it would have been a waste of my limited allotment of units to work with to have both of them in the mod. So I decided to go with just one. And I went with Humvees. Even though from a purely in-universe story perspective, that doesn't make much sense because the battle is European versus Soviet forces, and Humvees are US manufactured. But I guess we can just assume there's some kind of equivalent vehicle to Humvees. In the original Red Alert, there were a number of oddities in terms of the units that were available. Like longbows, which are basically the same thing as Apaches, I think, are also US manufactured and also didn't get fielded until the 1970s, which is well after when the original Red Alert appears to have taken place, considering that Stalin and Einstein, who are characters in that, died in the 1950s, so there's a lot of things about the Red Alert timeline that don't make a whole lot of sense, but that's okay. We love the game anyway. It doesn't really have to make a whole lot of sense. Though because of how little sense it makes, I felt at liberty to kind of abuse the timeline a lot. Because, again, things don't make sense as they are, even when you just consider Red Alert individually, let alone if you were to attempt to reconcile it with Tiberian Dawn. Many contradictions appear when you try to do that. So I felt at liberty to just change things all over the place to suit the story of Red Alert Alternative. And one of the things I did was compress the timeline, so that even though this takes place about 8 years after the end of Red Alert, Tiberium falls and Nod is formed, and things that in general you would assume took longer to occur between Red Alert and Tiberian Dawn. Not that Red Alert being a prequel to Tiberian Dawn ended up being canon anyway. I think Red Alert had, or excuse me, Westwood Studios had plans to tie them together, but then they got bought out by EA. EA made some changes to the timeline and the story, etc., etc. So they just became completely separate timelines, ultimately, in the end. And they're very difficult to reconcile as it is anyway, but it's fun to do. It's a lot of fun figuring out how Red Alert can lead into Tiberian Dawn. Excuse me. So I guess while we're waiting out this defense portion of the mission, another thing I'll discuss about the story is, of course, the Allies are morphing into Nod by this point in the story. Even though they've become the reconstituted Allies, they're a much stronger, proper military force now with a variety of increasingly good technology, like the flame tanks and the AGTs that you get in this mission. Obviously, Kane is very much in control by this point, and that is starting to grate on Dr. Leibniz, a plot point that comes into play much later during the Soviet campaign. And by this point, it is very much Kane's military black arms armament connections and his sort of secret army he has in the Brotherhood of Nod that have enabled the Allies' success, the Resistance's success, together with the efforts of the player, Field Commander A9. So we are very advanced in our evolution of Allies into Nod at this point. Now, in the canon stories of Command & Conquer, Nod are pretty much straight up just bad guys. They don't really seem to have much in the way of redeeming qualities in the official games. They're just bog standard black hat terrorists. They happily kill civilians left and right. They're just straight up villains. And Kane, likewise, basically just seems to be, ultimately, a bog standard megalomaniac and homicidal killer who just has a heaping helping of excess charisma. I actually think that Joe Kukin's performance is far and away the major reason that Kane is such a compelling character. And that if you were to take away that incredible performance, that probably Kane would not be nearly as interesting of a character, I strongly suspect. And because Kane is such an interesting character, though, whether that's because of Joe Kukin's performance or whatever other reason, I feel like the canon depiction of him as just this ultimately standard megalomaniac, this homicidal terrorist leader who's just very charismatic, I feel like it's a bit of a missed opportunity because he could be much more than that, and they sometimes hint at him being much more than that. Like, there's his apparent immortality, for one thing, because he doesn't appear to age between the games at all, really. And there's little subtle hints. Oh god, I may be about to lose the mission. I didn't realize that was happening over there, because I was so busy just blabbing. I need to cut them off and destroy them. I lost my entire eastern flank. And I can't show off the part of the mission that actually changed if I lose the defense part. So we need to nip this in the bud. I'm failing everywhere. Anyway. No. Cut him off. This needs to be prevented. I did deliberately set up the enemy teams so that they are fairly easily distracted, because this mission would be very unfair if they just beelined straight for the northwest area, which causes you to lose if they reach it. This is the first appearance of the Tesla tanks and the shock troopers in this mod. I thought it was appropriate for them to make their first appearance when you fight Zhukov for real for the first time. You first encounter him in Mission 4, but it's not really a real fight exactly, because his force is so overwhelming at that point that you can only evacuate your forces. You don't really have a hope of defeating him. So this is the first real fight against him, which is part of the reason that I agreed with Ortega that the mission was too easy. I mean, Zhukov, in terms of the mod's lore, is the general who defeated the Allies. So he's supposed to be like the Soviets' best, essentially. Fighting him should really feel epic and difficult. The original version of the mission was actually very different. And you had access to mine layers. And the original version of the mission, it was very key to winning that you laid mines all over the place. But I realized that while mine layers are super effective, placing mines all over the place is intensely boring and tedious. So I actually decided that I didn't really like that the mission relied so heavily on that, so I completely redesigned it from scratch. The next version of the mission was very, very similar to this. In fact, it was this version, except that after the defense portion of the mission ended, Zhukov was hyper aggressive and produced and attacked with so many units that it was actually extremely difficult. And honestly, it felt more like endgame level difficulty and was a little ridiculous, so I toned it down. But I think that I toned it down a little too far and made it a little too easy, considering it's supposed to be this big epic fight against the Soviets' best commander. So that is what I've done. I have now increased the difficulty. It's not quite back to its original level of difficulty, because again, that was a little ridiculous. But I souped it up a great deal. So we should see that Zhukov is more aggressive now that we're in the counterattack portion of the mission than he was when Ortega played it. So this should be a bit of a slugfest. Hopefully seeing the difference will be interesting. Now, in Red Alert, it is sort of, in the Soviet ending, suggested that the player, who obviously is the commander who defeated the Allies, so is Zhukov, essentially. Zhukov was the Soviet commander in the original Red Alert, according to this mod's lore. That Kane, who had been orchestrating things from behind the scenes, elevated him to position of Premier of the Soviet Union, of Chairman, or whatever the heck his title is, after having Stalin and basically all of Stalin's inner circle assassinated. Now, clearly, in this mod, Zhukov isn't the Premier. So, and we also notice that Kane has turned against the Soviet Union. The mod never directly says this, but we can maybe infer from these facts that Zhukov, who was originally a Nod agent, it's sort of suggested in Red Alert that you were a Nod agent all along when Kane elevates you to the position of chairman at the end of the game. We can kind of infer that maybe Zhukov essentially betrayed Kane and didn't go along with the program. Since Kane has turned on the Soviet Union, Zhukov is not the premier, not the chairman. He has decided that he preferred being a commander, a general, and so he elevated one of his own supporters to position of chairman instead, essentially going against whatever Kane's plans were. And so the chairman is the menacing man who is designed after Krukov from Red Alert 3, I think it was 3, not 2, that we see in the Soviet campaign. So yeah, there's sort of an implication of some betrayals that occurred in the background. Now, I was discussing Nod and Kane, but when things kind of got intense and I had to switch focus. As I was saying, I think that the portrayal of Kane as essentially just this megalomaniacal terrorist leader was a little bit of a missed opportunity because he's so charismatic and he has all these mysterious things, like his apparent biological immortality, which is strange to say the least, and little hints that maybe he's actually the biblical Cain. Like, there's a piece of the Temple of Nod that you see in the ending to Tiberian Dawn during the end credits. It's not really, they don't draw attention to it at all. But there's a little piece of the Temple of Nod which appears to be depicting the murder of Abel by Cain. And so there's, that and his immortality. The fact that the organization is called the Brotherhood of Nod, which is a biblical reference. All flirting with the idea that maybe Cain really is the biblical Cain. This guy who's thousands of years old and is immortal for some reason. And he seems to know about Tiberium. He got his hands on the Tacitus somehow. Just a really interesting character, in my opinion. And I think that the games, Command and Conquer, Tiberian Sun, did not really make full use of what an interesting character he was. And I'm going to do something that might be verboten. I'm going to actually acknowledge that Command and Conquer 4 exists. Because while, yes, obviously Command and Conquer 4 was a major letdown, for a couple reasons to my mind. One is that they didn't let you build bases in a Command and Conquer game. That was a questionable decision, to say the least. And then there was the player's wife thing, and then the player's wife gets killed. And I kind of see what they were going for with that. They were trying to kind of create this emotional event and attachment, but they just executed it very poorly, and it just ended up being kind of cringe. At least that's my take on it. And so those two factors really led to CNC4 not being very good overall. The lack of base building, the stumbling with the execution of the plot and the player's wife thing. However, that doesn't mean that everything about CNC4 was terrible. I know some people might come at me with pitchforks for saying that, but I'm going to stick with it. And one of the things that I liked about CNC4 was how it kind of toyed with the idea of Cain having non-evil motives. Idiot, don't go the long way around. I actually really liked that. How he was trying to achieve what was called Ascension, and didn't just want to conquer the world, but was after something stranger and more mysterious. Now, as to whether the whole Ascension thing itself was all that interesting as a plot device, as a motive for Cain, maybe not. It's just the fact that he wasn't plainly evil, just this guy who wants to conquer the world, that I liked. And so, for this mod, I kind of ran with that idea. Maybe Nod isn't just this evil terrorist organization. Maybe Cain isn't just this evil megalomaniac. Maybe they're after something different, something strange and mysterious that's not readily apparent or easy to understand, that's related to Tiberium. And the mod never really sort of comes right out and says this, but I'm kind of toying with the idea that the depiction of Nod in, for example, Tiberian Dawn is to some degree GDI propaganda. Like, what if Tiberian Dawn is essentially the depiction of the first Tiberium War through the lens of GDI propaganda? Them just depicting themselves as these knights in shining armor, and Nod as just these evil terrorists. And what if that's just one perspective of the war? What if it's not completely accurate? And so this mod is almost like, what if Nod were allowed to tell their side of the story? What would their side of the story look like? And so I toyed with the idea of, what if they're really resisting legitimate oppression? And there's few things more oppressive than the Soviet Union. So what if they essentially, well, they're an ancient organization by the lore of Command and Conquer, but what if they essentially came out into the light and into modern prominence through fighting against the Soviet Union for the freedom of Europe. And then the Soviet Union morphed into GDI, so that GDI has its origins in being the military arm of this totalitarian state. And that maybe not as legitimately freedom fighters against this really evil institution, organization. I thought that was more interesting. And I wouldn't necessarily assume that this depiction of events is 100% accurate either, because maybe this is essentially Nod's propaganda on the conflict. Them trying to make themselves look good and paint themselves in the best light that they possibly can. And maybe that's essentially what this mod is. And so then you've got the GDI propaganda of the conflict from Tiberian Dawn. And now here from Red Alert, you have Nod essentially giving their side of what they're fighting for and what they're really all about. And maybe they're both partially telling the truth and partially lying. I'm probably going to lose my base because they attacked me at the same time I attacked them. So that's fun. That's good times. Well, I won't just let it happen, though. I'll try building defenses. Oh, well, if they're going to come back to defend their base, then I guess I'll be okay. As you can see, this is not going as easily as it did when Ortega launched his attack. The enemy has built more forces, and I also followed Ortega's suggestion of making their harvesters less accessible. As you can see, the only way to get it where their harvesters are harvesting is through their base, unlike in the version of the mission he played, where the enemy ore field is more easily accessible and it's easier to destroy their harvesters and starve them out. So they built more units, they had an extra Tesla coil, their harvesters were less accessible. This version of the mission is more difficult than the one that Ortega played. I don't know if I've done a great job showing that off because I just started ranting about what I was trying to do with the story and my depiction of Kane and Nod, rather than properly showing off how the enemy was being more aggressive and building more stuff, which is maybe what I should have been doing. But I didn't, so good job to me. However, this attack is failing, so, you know, that's kind of demonstrating how the enemy forces are stronger. And yeah, so I wanted Kane's motives to be more ambiguous in this mod, and for it to not just be straight up the case that he's this clearly evil dude. I didn't want him to obviously be a good guy either, so I want him to just kind of be mysterious and have ambiguous motives. Hopefully I succeeded at doing that. Hopefully it's interesting. People seem to think that it is, so that's good. I'm actually going to have to stop this recording fairly soon because I'm recording it during a break from work. And I have to get back to work pretty soon. And I think I guess I'll play it all the way through so that we can see the enemy building more aggressively some more and continue to enjoy the more difficult, more challenging version of this mission. Because again, we're fighting Zhukov. He's the ultimate antagonist of the Allied campaign, the destroyer of the Allies. He is supposed to be a really tough opponent. I think that the enhanced version of the mission that we're seeing here does a better job of depicting that. That I had in fact toned the mission down too much in the version that Ortega played. I do have quite the economy going, so I think I can afford to build even yet another war factory and really crank out the units fast for another attack. Now, if he rebuilds both of the Tesla coils I destroyed, my attack really will have achieved almost nothing. But he is burning through his supply of ore, so we are going to win the war of attrition if things keep up like this. I'll play for a few more minutes, because I don't have to go back to work quite yet. I might even, if I'm able to crank out an army big enough very quickly, make one more attempt on the enemy base. Or I might save it. I might sort of break up my recording session. We'll see. Nope. Was already primary. So the music tracks... Obviously, I replaced all the music tracks in the game, except the title screen music, which I attempted to change, but For some reason, it doesn't work. I don't know why. The title screen music just refuses to use the music that I tried to replace it with. So whatever. All the other music is replaced. Almost all of it comes from obscure Japanese shoot-'em-ups. Like the track we're listening to right now is called The Last Ditch Fight, and it comes from the shoot-'em-up 19XX, The War Against Destiny. There's also a few tracks created by Nevan Alexanian of Navik Music. They are custom tracks that I had commissioned for my own game projects. Nevan Alexanian is a very talented composer. I'll go ahead and play one of his tracks that I really, really like. Artega seemed to really like it as well. It is this one. It starts off pretty quiet. I didn't do a great job with equalizing the volume of the different music tracks. In fact, I didn't do a good job at all. I believe the term for that is mixing, but I'm not an audio engineer in any way, shape, or form, so I might be completely wrong about that. And in any case, that is not my specialty. I have zero training in that, so the audio balance of the different music tracks is not amazing. And it's actually really good that the enemy ran out of ore. Well, obviously, that's a good thing. And that they sent their harvester over to me so that I could destroy it and tease out all their units to attack. Because now I can destroy them out of range of their base defenses, which is much easier to do. And then there's a couple other tracks that are not from shoot-'em-ups. Tracks that I actually added after the fact, midway through Artega's playthrough. One is from the game Zero Escape is Zero Time Dilemma, which is sort of a puzzle game slash visual novel game. And the other is a track from an anime called Eat Man, which, contrary to what you might think from its name, is not a hentai. It's not pornographic. I'm not into that kind of thing. It is a sci-fi series about a guy who can eat basically anything and like turn the things he eats into weapons, that kind of thing, if I remember right. It's honestly not a great series, but it had some music I really, really like, and so I used one track from that in this game. And aside from those exceptions, from Navik Music's tracks, the Zero Time Dilemma track, and the Eat Man track, everything else is from obscure Japanese shoot-'em-ups. Which, in my opinion, obscure Japanese shoot-'em-up music actually works surprisingly well as real-time strategy game music. And I do think that it helps to give the mod its own distinct atmosphere from Red Alert and Tiberian Dawn, so that it feels a little bit different. Probably a little bit more anime, given that the tracks all come from Japanese sources. So, I used to really, really like anime and watch a lot of it. I feel like to a large extent I've outgrown a lot of anime. I haven't watched any new anime in a couple years now, and I don't really miss it too much. But that doesn't mean that I suddenly hate all things anime, far from it. I still kind of like the anime art style, as is probably pretty obvious from the fact that that's kind of the art style that I use for the portraits that I drew for the cutscenes in this game. There's still some manga that I like to read. I still like a lot of sort of anime-flavored games, like the Langrisser series. But anime in general, I'm not as into it as I used to be. Like I said, I think I kind of outgrew it to an extent. A lot of it is pretty obviously the target audience is teenagers, and it really shows. Some people just absolutely have this hatred and loathing for anime. I'm not like that at all. Like I said, I used to be a huge fan, and I still kind of like it. But I'm certainly not as much of a fan of it as I used to be. But I do still like a lot of Japanese properties, and so that's why there's pretty clearly sort of a Japanese gaming influence on aspects of this game. And it appears that I am going to mop things up quite handily with this second attack. Just in time for going back to work, too. So, nicely timed. If I have to, I'll just cut the video off early. Because clearly this is over. I don't think we really have to see the entire conclusion. Yeah, I know. Go ahead and futilely shoot at my army of tanks, Hind. Hinds are actually really good because their machine gun that they use is actually fairly effective against everything. I mean, it's not amazing against heavy armor, but it's not bad. Several Hinds will do significant damage to a heavily armored target. And they're very good against everything else. Infantry, buildings. They have quite a bit of ammo. Hinds are quite a good air unit, actually. I really like the Orcas from Tiberian Dawn. I thought those were a really, really cool air unit. Some people seem to dislike that the air units in Tiberian Dawn and Red Alert have to return to their helipad to reload, but I actually really, really like that. It just feels right. I know that technically every unit, including ground units, should have limited ammo, so it's unrealistic that all the other units have unlimited ammunition, and that it's only air units that don't. But for some reason it bothers me more if air units have unlimited ammo. It just feels more ridiculous, because realistically a tank can hold a lot of shots. Like, I think modern tanks hold about 60 rounds or something like that for their main gun, which is a fair amount. But an air unit can only hold a pretty limited number of, you know, missiles or Vulcan gun rounds. So it feels weird if they just have totally unlimited ammo, never have to land.
Mission accomplished.
So I like that they have to return to their helipads to reload. Okay, cool. I won just in time to go back to work. So that was another mission that changed significantly. I don't know how well I showed that off, but I promise the enemy was more aggressive and was building a lot more stuff than in the version of the mission that Artega played. Hopefully that kind of came through, even though I was mostly babbling about other stuff. So that's another episode of Red Alert Alternative Director's Cut done. Hope it was entertaining. Have a good one, everybody, and thanks for watching. And I need to Alt-Tab out of this so I can stop the recording.